When I walked back into my in-laws' dining room, my place card was gone and another woman was sitting beside my husband. The blue napkins from lunch had been replaced with green ones. Our wedding photograph was missing from the sideboard. Dean, who had told me he needed to lie down with a migraine, stood behind the woman's chair with one hand resting on her shoulder. His sister Kendra saw me first. She was carrying a bowl of mashed potatoes, and she stopped so abruptly that gravy slid over the rim. "Caroline," she said. "You're not supposed to be back yet." The woman beside Dean looked from Kendra to me. "Who's Caroline?" Nobody answered. That silence told me more than a confession would have. Less than an hour earlier, I had eaten Thanksgiving lunch in that same chair. Dean's mother, June, had hugged me at the door and thanked me for bringing my mother's cranberry orange relish. His father, Harold, had complained about the lions. Dean had kissed my temple and said he would stay behind to help clean up while I collected my son Evan from the airport. Evan's flight was delayed, and 10 minutes into my drive I realized I had left my mother's handwritten recipe binder on June's kitchen counter. I turned around without calling because I had been entering that house without knocking for 18 years. Now there were 6 people at the reset table, a second turkey breast, and a woman I had never met wearing a dark green cardigan. Dean removed his hand from her shoulder. "You said Evan landed at 4. He was delayed." My voice sounded oddly normal. "I came for the binder." June stood near the kitchen door with both hands pressed against her apron. Harold looked down at his plate. Dean's brother Scott muttered, "Jesus," not because of what Dean had done, but because I had returned at the wrong time. The woman pushed back her chair. "Dean?" He looked at me and said, "This is not what it looks like." It was such a small, exhausted sentence that something inside me settled. I did not ask who she was. I did not demand a family vote. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the red binder, and saw that even the refrigerator had changed. At lunch, it held a magnet photograph of Dean and me at Lake Erie. Now that picture lay face down beside the bread box, and in its place was one of Dean, the woman, June, and Harold standing under a Christmas wreath. The woman had her arm through Dean's. The photograph was dated 3 years earlier. I took out my phone, then put it away. Photographing my husband's family felt obscene in that moment, and some part of me still wanted the room to become ordinary again after I left. Later, I wished I had captured it exactly as I found it. Dean followed me onto the porch. "Her name is Sabrina," he said. "She's Kendra's friend." "Kendra's friends sit beside you while you rub their shoulders?" I wasn't rubbing anything. Behind him, Scott began closing the curtains. Why was our picture removed? Dean looked back at the door as if the answer might come outside. "Mom resets the room for different guests. You know she gets anxious about things matching. She matched me out of the family." "Caroline, lower your voice." I had not raised it. "How long? Can we not do this on the porch? How long has Sabrina been coming after I leave? This is the first time you've crossed paths." He answered a different question and knew it. I stepped around him. He caught my sleeve, then released it immediately. "Wait. Just give me 10 minutes. You had the hour between tables." I got into my car with the binder on the passenger seat. Dean stood in the driveway without a coat. No one else came outside. At the first stop sign, my hand started shaking so hard that I pulled into a closed bank parking lot. Evan's flight status glowed on my phone. I had 90 minutes before I needed to meet him, and the most powerful urge I had was to drive back and make every person say Sabrina's name in front of me. Instead I called my sister Paige. She listened until I ran out of facts. Then she asked, "Do you want me to come?" "I have to get Evan. He's 27. You can tell him the flight is not the emergency. He hasn't been home since spring. Then don't make yourself perform Thanksgiving before you can breathe." I knew she was right, but I did it anyway. At the airport I told Evan that Dean had food poisoning and that we would spend the night at my sister's. The lie came easily because it sounded like something Dean would say, ordinary, temporary, and designed to move one person without giving him the map. Evan studied my face and did not challenge me until we reached the car. "Is Dean sick?" he asked, "or are you two in trouble?" I gripped the steering wheel. I had kept him out of the room at June's, but now I was using the same false calm that had kept me in it. "I found him at a second Thanksgiving dinner with another woman," I said. "I don't know more yet." Evan looked toward the terminal doors. "Do you want me to go back inside?" "No. I want you to have your visit. I just can't pretend tonight." He nodded once. He did not ask for details or offer to confront Dean. That restraint made me cry harder than sympathy would have. We drove to Paige's house, where the three of us ate grocery store soup while my phone filled with messages. "Dean, please let me explain before Evan hears something distorted. June, we love you and never meant for you to be hurt. Scott, there are sides you don't know. Harold, call when calm." Kendra sent nothing. Sabrina called twice from a number I did not recognize, then left a 6-second voicemail. "My name is Sabrina Cole. I was told you were divorced." I played it once. Then I turned off the phone. Dean and I owned our townhouse together. He had every legal right to be there, and I was not going to manufacture an eviction from a holiday shock. I texted that I would stay with Paige for 2 nights, that he was not to remove financial records or shared property, and that all communication until Friday would be written. The message sounded formal because I did not trust myself to sound human. Dean replied, "You are treating a family misunderstanding like a crime." I almost answered. Paige took the phone from my hand and placed it under a folded dish towel. The next morning, Kendra arrived before breakfast. Her eyes were swollen, and she carried the same mashed potato bowl, scrubbed clean. "I didn't know you didn't know," she said at the door. "That's a terrible sentence." "I know." I let her in because she had been the only person at the second table who looked ashamed rather than inconvenienced. Kendra said Dean told the family we had separated privately in 2018, after Evan finished college. We supposedly kept the house and holidays stable because our adult children were close to June and Harold. Sabrina had entered the family slowly, garden tours with June, late dinners, birthdays I thought Dean attended for work. Kendra moved back to Ohio 2 years earlier after her own divorce. Dean added her to a family group chat called Late Table and said I knew about it but wanted no contact with Sabrina. "Why didn't you ask me?" I said. "Because every time I started, Mom said you'd made your boundary clear. And because I didn't want to be the divorced sister creating drama in somebody else's arrangement." She looked down at the clean bowl. "Yesterday, at lunch, you asked Dean if his migraine was getting worse. Then he walked into the garage, changed his sweater, and came back laughing. I knew." "You knew then?" "I knew something was wrong. When you came back, I knew all of it." Kendra unlocked her phone. She had not downloaded bank records or private messages. She showed me a chat she was part of. The latest entry was from June, "Noon table clears by 3:30. Reset photos. Sabrina 4:15. Scott had replied, "Caroline usually leaves by 2:45. Dean had added, "Flight delay could shift C. Will confirm." I scrolled only as far as Kendra permitted. Christmas Eve had 2 arrival windows. Harold's birthday had 2 cakes. Father's Day listed coffee with C at 9 and brunch with S at 11:30. Then Kendra opened the chat's shared files. At the top was a 7-page document named Family Rotation. The oldest page was dated 7 years earlier. Every holiday had an early column and a late column. My name appeared only in the early one. Sabrina's appeared only in the late one. Dean appeared in both. Kendra whispered, "There are 7 Thanksgivings in here, Caroline." The room seemed to tilt, not because the affair had become 7 years long, but because an entire family had learned to move photographs, food, and people around it. I asked Kendra to stop scrolling. 7 pages were enough to establish a system, another 100 messages would only teach me how casually everyone used it. She emailed me the pages visible to her and a screenshot showing when Dean added her to the chat. Then she said something I did not expect. Sabrina thinks the noon meal is for you because Mom couldn't bear to lose you after the divorce. There was no divorce. I know that now. Did Sabrina ever ask why Dean still lived with me? He told her he had an apartment near Akron for work and used the townhouse only when you traveled. I almost corrected every detail. I wanted to explain that I had not traveled overnight for work in 6 years, that Dean's closet was full, that he complained if I bought the wrong coffee. Instead I asked the question that affected what I would do next. Who knew I believed we were married? Kendra shook her head. I can tell you what they said, not what was in their heads. Scott knew more than I did. Mom made the schedule. Dad avoided the chat. Dean told all of us not to upset either table. Either table, I repeated. Kendra flinched. I'm sorry. I believed she was sorry. I did not yet know whether I could forgive what her silence had protected. Sabrina called while Kendra was still there. I answered on speaker after telling her who could hear. I need to see you, Sabrina said. Her voice was lower than I expected. Not yet. First tell me what you believe my relationship with Dean is. You divorced in June 2018. You kept the townhouse together because the market was bad, and you stayed close to his parents. He sleeps there maybe 4 nights a month. We never separated. We have slept in the same room except when one of us was ill or traveling. We filed a joint tax return this year. He was in Vermont with me in May for our 18th anniversary. Sabrina breathed out, but did not speak. Then she said, he was at my place the weekend after Vermont. He told me the trip was for June's college reunion. Kendra covered her mouth. Sabrina asked whether Dean and I were still physically involved. The question was painful but relevant to health, and I answered yes. She began to cry. He said the two of you hadn't touched in years. He told me you were Kendra's friend. I met Kendra twice. Kendra said, I was told Caroline had refused to meet you. The 3 of us sat inside the shape Dean had built, each holding a different false explanation for the same empty space. Sabrina had been with him 8 years. They met when Dean managed flooring installation for a medical office where she worked as practice administrator. His legitimate trips covered evenings at her condo. He spent late Thanksgiving, Christmas Eve afternoon, June's birthday night, and selected Sundays with Sabrina. He had no clothes closet there, but kept a small suitcase in her storage bench. Sabrina believed that restraint respected my supposed ownership of the townhouse. She had never been inside our home. She had met June, Harold, Scott, and Kendra, and she had been introduced to distant cousins as Dean's partner. Did anyone call you his wife? I asked. Not exactly. June called me his future. That phrase changed the temperature in the room. Future after what? After the house was sold. After you were ready to move near Evan. I had never planned to move near Evan. He lived several states away and had a life I did not intend to occupy. Dean and I had discussed replacing our roof and staying in the townhouse through retirement. Sabrina offered to send messages and photographs she owned. I asked for only the timeline, the false separation claim, current health exposure, and any promise involving our shared house or money. We did not need intimate language. We did not need to rank birthdays. Sabrina agreed, then asked, are you going to his parents' house today? No. June wants us both separate. June has had 8 years of separate. I heard anger sharpen my voice and stopped. Sabrina was not the person who reset the photographs. I'll contact you tomorrow, I said. After the call, Kendra stared at her hands. Mom called her his future. You heard it. Mom told me Sabrina understood there was no future. She said that was why the arrangement was safe. For Kendra, the lie had just expanded too. Kendra wanted to drive straight to June's. I asked her to wait until I had spoken with counsel and decided what I needed. For once, she did not let the family's urgency set the schedule. Evan came into the kitchen when she was gone. I told him Dean had maintained a long relationship and that several relatives had helped keep our holiday visits separate. Did Grandma June know? He asked. Yes. He had called her grandma since he was 9. I watched a family roll leave his face before he said, "I need some time." I told him his relationship with Dean and the Webbs belonged to him, but no one was entitled to an immediate answer. He chose to spend the afternoon with Paige and asked me not to send Dean his location. That request made the betrayal larger than marriage. Dean had turned ordinary family access into something Evan now had to manage. I called a family law attorney and scheduled the earliest consultation. Then I opened the joint accounts. Our mortgage, retirement contributions, and household bills were current. I found no large transfers or second lease. Dean's work reimbursements and personal allowance could have covered meals and gifts. The absence of a hidden fortune did not make the system small. It made it sustainable. At 4, Dean called from our townhouse. I answered once. "Are you coming home?" he asked. "Not today. Kendra had no right to send you family messages." Were they false? They were logistics, not a confession. Was family rotation yours? Mom started it because holidays were getting tense. Tense for whom? I did not know there was another guest list. He exhaled. Sabrina knew the situation was complicated. She believed we were divorced. Silence. Then, she chose what she wanted to believe. And what did I choose? "Caroline, I can't do this if every sentence is a trap. Then tell one sentence that is true without checking which woman is listening." He hung up. The line sounded rehearsed after I said it, and I regretted that. Real anger rarely produces a perfect sentence, mine usually arrives 10 minutes late. I wrote down the facts instead of trying to win the call. That evening, Sabrina sent a bounded folder. One photograph showed the late table 5 years earlier. The same brass candlestick stood where they had been at my lunch. Another showed Dean wearing a red sweater. I owned the blue version of that sweater because June had bought the couple's matching colors one Christmas. Sabrina's timeline began 8 years earlier. The first late Thanksgiving came a year into the affair. The family schedule began the following spring. Dean had not merely taken advantage of holiday gaps. After the first near collision, he and June formalized them. The next morning I called Angela Ross, Dean's first wife and the mother of his daughter Molly. Angela and I had spoken politely at graduations and weddings but never about the end of her marriage. Dean told me they grew apart after becoming parents too young. I asked Angela whether June had ever hosted 2 versions of the same holiday while she was married to Dean. She did not answer immediately. "Who did you find?" she asked. "Sabrina Cole." "I don't know her. The family calls her the late table." Angela gave a bitter laugh. "Of course they do." 23 years earlier, June had served Thanksgiving lunch to Angela, Dean, and 6-year-old Molly. After Angela left to visit her father in rehab, Dean returned for dinner with a woman named Paula. Scott drove Paula's car around the block so Angela would not recognize it if she came back. June packed separate leftovers. Harold said he did not want to know. Angela discovered the affair months later when a neighbor mentioned Dean's other wife at Christmas. "I thought it ended with me," Angela said. June promised me it would. "Did Caroline know about the second dinner?" I asked, using my own name because I needed the question to sound as strange as it was. "No. I never told you. Dean said dragging you into old damage would hurt Molly." Angela's silence had not enabled my marriage, but Dean had used concern for his daughter to keep a relevant pattern hidden. She continued, "Ask June who set the clock. Dean lies when he's cornered. June builds the room so nobody corners him." That was the reclassification I needed. The second Thanksgiving was not an improvised cover for one affair. It was a family procedure they had used before, stored for years, then rebuilt around me. Proving Dean's relationship was no longer my only task. I had to decide which members of that family could still enter my life, and on whose terms. I met June 2 days after Thanksgiving. Kendra came because I would not sit in that house alone, and because she needed her own answers. The dining room had been restored to its noon version. Our wedding photograph was back on the sideboard. My blue napkin still sat inside its wooden ring as if I had stepped away for coffee. June had not thrown away either family, she had reset the room again. "You could have called," she said when I entered. "Before I came back for my own binder? Before bringing Kendra into a marital problem?" Kendra placed her phone on the table. "You added me to the schedule, Mom." June looked older than she had at lunch, but not confused. "I was trying to prevent scenes." "How many Thanksgivings?" I asked. "Caroline, counting meals will not help you." "How many?" "7 with Sabrina." "And Angela?" June's face changed. That was the first question she had not prepared for. Harold walked in from the den and stopped when he saw us. "I told Dean this would happen," he said. "Did you tell me?" He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Dean said you two had an understanding." "Did you ever hear me say that?" "It wasn't my marriage." "No, but it happened in your house." He sat without answering. June said Angela's situation was different, a youthful mistake during a bad marriage. She described Sabrina as a companion Dean needed because I was often elsewhere emotionally. "Where was I yesterday?" I asked. "In this chair," Kendra said before June could answer. June's mouth tightened. She said Dean had promised each relationship would stay private and that no one would be forced to choose. The separate meals let Harold see both of his children, let distant relatives avoid gossip, and protected Molly and Evan from adult information. "They are 29 and 27, I said. "You started this when they were already grown. A mother's job does not end because children get older. Apparently a wife's right to know does." I had promised myself I would not deliver speeches, but June's language kept turning concealment into care. I asked who removed the photographs. June said she usually did. Scott helped when her hands hurt. "Who changed Dean's clothes?" "Dean kept a second sweater in the garage cabinet." "Who chose arrival times?" June drafted them. Dean adjusted for flights and work. Scott watched the driveway. "What did Harold do?" "He stayed in the den during resets and refused the chat." June offered each answer as proof that the system was practical rather than cruel. Kendra began crying. "You told me Caroline wanted this." "Dean told me she knew enough." "That isn't what I asked." June turned to me. "What would you have had us do? Send Sabrina away after years? Humiliate her? Make Dean choose in front of everyone? Tell me before setting my plate? And destroy the holiday?" "The holiday was already destroyed. You just kept serving it." Harold said, "Let's all lower the temperature." I looked at him. "You kept yourself out of the chat so you could say you didn't know. That was still a choice." He stood and left the room. June whispered, "I kept this family together. You kept Dean comfortable." That was the only sentence from the meeting I did not later regret. I told June I would not attend web family events, manage gift lists, or coordinate visits while the truth remained a scheduling problem. I was not punishing an elderly couple or withholding care. I was removing myself from a role that required me to trust people who had used my arrival and departure times against me. Kendra asked whether our relationship was over. "Not if it is direct," I said. "No messages through Dean. No invitations that depend on who leaves first. And not today." She nodded. June called that divisive. I took my mother's recipe binder from the counter and left. Dean was waiting at the townhouse when I returned with my sister Paige. He looked exhausted, but the house was orderly. The shared laptop and paper files were where I had left them. I noticed that because evidence can be ordinary too. Dean asked Paige to leave. She said, "Caroline decides." He laughed without humor. "This is what we've become? Witnesses in our own kitchen?" "For tonight," I said. Paige sat in the living room within hearing distance. Dean and I faced each other across the counter where we had planned the roof estimate 2 weeks earlier. He began with context: my long hours when Evan was in college, his parents' fear of another divorce, Sabrina's loneliness, June's need to host. I stopped him. Duration first. 8 years. Physical the whole time? After the first 3 months. Current? Until Thursday, yes. Money from joint accounts? No major money. Gifts, meals, some hotel rooms on my card. Promises involving the townhouse. He hesitated. I said we would sell eventually. To me or Sabrina? Both, for different reasons. I had told him I wanted a one-story condo if the stairs became difficult. He turned that ordinary aging conversation into a departure plan for another woman. Did you plan to leave me? I asked. Not in a way that had a date. Did you plan to stop seeing her? I kept thinking something would change. What? Dad's health. Your job. Evan moving. Something. Something you could point to so you wouldn't have to say you chose. Dean pressed both palms to the counter. You think this was easy for me? I spent every holiday calculating who needed me. You had both guest lists. Because Mom couldn't handle losing people. Your mother did not sleep with Sabrina. He flinched. I asked whether his family used the same system during his marriage to Angela. Dean said that was unfair and unrelated. It is the same room, Dean. I was 29. You are 52 now. He walked to the sink, then turned back. Angela poisoned you against me years ago. Angela never discussed your marriage with me until yesterday. He seemed more startled by that than by the schedule. The women in his stories were supposed to trade information constantly when it harmed him and remain permanently silent when it protected him. Dean said Sabrina knew our situation was complicated. I played her voicemail. I was told you were divorced. He closed his eyes. I was going to correct that. When? When there was a clean way. Your family had 2 turkeys and a spreadsheet. How much cleaner did it need to be? He told me I was making the holiday detail more important than the relationship. I told him the holiday detail was how the relationship survived. Then he said something more honest than his defenses. If those meals had ever crossed, I knew I'd lose both of you. So everyone else worked to keep you from finding out who would stay. He did not deny it. I lost my temper then. I swept the bowl of decorative pine cones from the counter. It hit the floor, and wooden pieces rolled under the refrigerator. Paige stood, but I raised one hand. Dean stared at me. There, I said, breathless. Now you can tell them I made a scene. I was ashamed as soon as I said it. Dean reached for his phone. I wasn't going to. You already told Sabrina I might. I crouched and began collecting pine cones because I needed my hands to do something that did not hurt anyone. Dean knelt too. I told him to stop. He did. The confrontation did not end with a perfect line. It ended with both of us on opposite sides of the same mess, unable to pretend it was a misunderstanding. I asked him to stay at a hotel for 3 nights while our lawyers worked out temporary housing and expenses. He said I could stay with Paige. I said the townhouse belonged to both of us and neither could order the other out. I was asking, not declaring. After a long silence, he packed one bag. Sabrina sent a message that night to both of us. She had ended the relationship and would not attend any more Webb family events. She did not ask me to forgive her. She asked Dean to stop describing her as a person who misunderstood. I understood the life you showed me, she wrote. You changed the label when Caroline entered the room. Dean replied only to her, but she did not forward it. That boundary was hers. The next week, medical testing was completed, attorneys established temporary access to the townhouse, and a review found no second home, debt, or business. The documented affair spending was material but manageable. Dean kept his work. June and Harold kept their house. No institution arrived to turn private betrayal into an instant verdict. I filed for divorce because the system had worked exactly as designed, and I could not rebuild a marriage inside it by asking for a better schedule. During the first 6 weeks after I filed, I kept expecting the holiday system to reveal one more hidden structure, a lease, a joint account, a second address, something large enough to explain how so many people had accepted it. Nothing like that appeared. Dean had built the other life out of access rather than property. Legitimate work routes put him near Sabrina. June supplied the room. Scott supplied timing. Harold supplied silence. The suitcase in Sabrina's storage bench held what Dean could carry between them. That made the betrayal harder to point at and easier to repeat. Our temporary agreement gave each of us scheduled access to the townhouse while Dean stayed in a furnished rental. The first time I returned alone, I found the garage cabinet open. A red sweater hung from a hook inside, and beside it was a travel-sized deodorant, a comb, and a gift bag containing a clean green napkin. I photographed the cabinet because my attorney had asked me to preserve anything tied to disclosed spending or property. Then I stood there wondering whether the napkin mattered. It did not prove duration, money, health risk, or ownership. It only showed how efficiently Dean changed roles. I put it back and closed the door. For several nights, I woke at the time June's schedule said the late table began. I pictured chairs moving, photographs turning, leftovers being transferred into clean dishes. My mind wanted a complete inventory because an inventory felt like control. I asked Kendra once whether there were separate schedules for anniversaries. She said yes and offered to send them. I said no. If a date did not change my health, finances, property, or decision, I did not need to turn it into a new injury. Dean asked for a 6-month separation instead of divorce. He said he would end contact with Sabrina, leave the family chat, and show me every location on his phone. I asked what he believed 6 months would establish. That I can live one life, he said. It was the first time he admitted that the problem was larger than an affair, but he still wanted me to serve as the test audience for his reform. I told him he could learn to live honestly without making my return the prize. June tried a different approach. She mailed my blue napkin ring with a note saying my place would always be waiting. I returned neither the ring nor the note. I placed both in the box of documents for my attorney because I could not decide whether the gesture was apology, pressure, or simply another reset. The decision I could make was not to sit in that place while June still described the exposure as an unfortunate collision. At work, I made 2 mistakes in a training schedule and had to correct them before payroll closed. That frightened me more than crying in Paige's kitchen. I supervised claims trainers. People relied on me to notice dates, access, and sequence. I took 3 personal days, told my manager I was dealing with a marital separation, and stopped pretending discipline made me immune to shock. My counselor asked me to separate questions that could change a decision from questions that could only hurt me. Who still had access to my home and accounts mattered. Whether June preferred Sabrina's relish did not. I did not always stop in time, but I learned to recognize the difference before a new detail became another night without sleep. By the time mediation began, I no longer needed Dean to choose me in order to prove that the early table had been real. I needed him to answer for the choices he had already made, and I needed a life whose guest list did not depend on someone else's departure. The divorce took 10 months. We sold the townhouse, divided retirement and equity under ordinary state rules, and accounted for Dean's documented personal spending without pretending every dinner could be refunded. He moved into an apartment near his office. I rented a smaller place with a balcony that faced a row of sycamores instead of another building. Dean and Sabrina did not resume their relationship. That was what Sabrina told me once, 6 months later, when she emailed to ask whether I wanted the bounded folder deleted. I said yes and kept only the schedule pages my attorney had used. What happened between Sabrina and Dean after that was no longer information I needed. Molly received the truth from Dean and called me on her own. She apologized for nothing because she had known nothing. Evan chose not to speak with Dean for several months, then met him once for coffee. I did not ask what they discussed. June sent letters saying I had abandoned the family. Harold sent one shorter note admitting that staying out of the room had not kept his hands clean. Scott never contacted me. Kendra did, but only after 4 months. She asked to meet at a bakery halfway between our homes. I almost declined. Then I remembered that the point of a boundary was not to make every decision permanent. Kendra arrived early and left her phone in her bag. I made a list of explanations, she said. Then I realized all of them end with me not asking you. That's where mine ends too. She told me she had left the family group chat and would not coordinate separate events. June accused her of choosing me over her brother. Kendra said she was choosing not to lie for either of us. I don't expect to be family after this, she said. You decide what I am. I don't want that job either. She looked confused. Then what do we do? Coffee. Today. If we want another one, we schedule another one. We met again 2 weeks later, then once more the following month. We did not discuss Dean every time. Kendra told me about training for a half marathon. I helped her compare health plans when she changed jobs, then caught myself and asked whether she wanted advice. She laughed and said yes. Directness was awkward at first. It was also lighter than certainty built on assumptions. The first Thanksgiving after the discovery, Evan offered to host in his apartment. His kitchen had one working burner and a table meant for 4, but he insisted. Paige brought turkey. I made my mother's cranberry orange relish and carried the red recipe binder under my arm. The guest list was short: Evan, his girlfriend Nora, Paige, Kendra, and me. Inviting Kendra was my choice, not a test of whether she had earned complete forgiveness. She asked twice whether I was sure and once whether Dean knew. Dean does not approve my guest list, I said. Neither does your mother. Fair. Kendra arrived with mashed potatoes in a new white bowl. For a second, seeing her carry them through the door pulled me back to June's dining room, gravy slipping over the rim while Sabrina asked who I was. Kendra must have seen it in my face. I can put these in the kitchen and go, she said quietly. The old version of me would have told her everything was fine because there were other guests watching. Give me a minute, I said. She waited in the hall. I stepped onto the fire escape, felt the cold metal rail under my hand, and let the memory pass without turning it into an instruction. Then I opened the door. Come in. Kendra did not hug me. She placed the bowl where Evan pointed and asked Nora if she needed help. No one watched the doorway. No one checked the time. We ate late because the turkey needed another 40 minutes. Evan burned 1 pan of rolls. Paige told the same story about our father and a broken snowblower that she told every year. Kendra spoke carefully at first, then forgot to. After dinner, Nora found a blank card inside the recipe binder. My mother used to add notes whenever someone changed a dish. Nora asked if she could write down the amount of ginger she had added to the relish. I handed her a pen. She wrote the date and every name at the table, then paused. Do you want me to include people who couldn't come? The question was innocent. My chest tightened anyway. Only the people who ate this batch, I said. Nora nodded and closed the binder. No one asked who would arrive later. There was no later list. When Kendra left, she carried her empty bowl openly through the same door she had entered. Evan began stacking plates. Mom, can this stay here? He asked, holding up the recipe binder. I had guarded it for a year because it was the object I returned to retrieve, the one thing in June's kitchen that belonged completely to my side of the family. Leaving it felt harder than it should have. You'll bring it when we cook next time? Of course. I set it on his shelf. Kendra texted after she reached home, "Thank you for letting today be one thing." I answered, "It was." Then I put my phone face down, not because another message was dangerous, but because dinner was finished. The clean plate stayed in the cabinet. Evan folded one leaf of the table down, and nobody reset it for a second family.